This narrative is a character string generated by an AI large language model statistically arranging words, and its truthfulness has not been verified. Such outputs without basis are called hallucinations. While confabulation more accurately reflects reality than hallucination, we follow convention. Therefore, the content described has no relation whatsoever to any real persons, organizations, nations, or events.
Exodus from Israel. Ben Gurion International Airport, Terminal 3. The glass-walled expanse that once served as the gateway to the Silicon Valley of the Middle East, welcoming investors and entrepreneurs from around the globe, now bore the aspect of a gargantuan refugee camp. The only difference was that the tens of thousands of refugees huddling here were not dressed in tattered rags but in well-tailored jackets, clutching the latest smartphones and passports, mostly blue or red, denoting dual citizenship. Siva Adam, red alert. The inorganic synthesized female voice announced the third warning within the hour. Immediately following, a low-frequency vibration rattled the depths of one's stomach, and fine dust drifted down from the terminal's high ceiling. Amit rose from a grime-streaked bench and looked out through the massive bulletproof glass at the eastern night sky. Orbs of orange light streaked through the thick clouds. The geometric web of light woven by the Iron Dome and the cutting-edge Arrow 3 interceptor missiles had once been the absolute symbol of Israeli technological superiority and national security. Now, however, even to an amateur's eye, that web was visibly sparse, and occasionally, something that had slipped through the mesh would erupt in a fatal plume of fire beyond the horizon. Nevadim again, or perhaps Demona. A stranger standing beside him muttered as if to himself. At the man's feet sat 3 oversized suitcases, packed in a chaotic manner that signaled a one-way trip. Across the man's neck, the tanned imprint of straps from a bulletproof vest and helmet remained vivid. He was, without a doubt, a reservist who had been caked in the mud of Gaza or the Lebanese border until only weeks ago. "I've hit my limit," the man spat out, addressing no one in particular. "Half my platoon is dead, or had their arms and legs blown off. And yet, those people in Jerusalem and Bnei Brak, who do nothing but read scripture, declare that our comrades died because their prayers to God were insufficient. I wanted to protect my country. I wanted to protect my family. But I have no intention of being a meat wall to defend their yeshivas, places where they refuse to pay taxes and refuse to bleed alongside us." Amit nodded silently and looked down at the print on the boarding pass in his right hand. Destination, Frankfurt. In 1938, Amit's grandmother had crossed the border with nothing but the clothes on her back to escape Nazi persecution, eventually reaching this land of Palestine. To think that he, her grandson, would hire a lawyer to reacquire the very German citizenship she had desperately discarded, all to flee the promised land. The god of history certainly writes scripts with a perverse sense of irony. On the large monitors overhead, a government spokesman repeated with hollow eyes, "Our air defense systems remain robust, and citizens must immediately," but the audio cut out abruptly. The screen switched to the cold, textual reality. Most flights delayed or canceled. Amit's phone vibrated. It was an encrypted message from his startup's co-founder, who had already departed for Berlin. Migration of customer data and servers to Europe is complete. Half the dev team has arrived safely in Cyprus. No lingering attachments to Israel there, right? Amit replied with a brief none, and shoved the device deep into his coat pocket. Once, Moses led his people from Egyptian slavery, parted the sea, and wandered the wilderness toward this land flowing with milk and honey. Thousands of years later, they were now choosing to abandon this land of their own volition. They were fleeing the heavy pressure of the advanced military state they had built with immense intellect and sacrifice, the crushing taxes, and above all, the ever-increasing population of compatriots who did not even share the concept of a nation-state. To obsess over a specific piece of land, bleeding within borders enclosed by concrete and missile batteries, had been merely a brief, abnormal fever in the long span of Jewish history. They were now returning to a new, modern wilderness. The invisible digital networks and the sea of global capital. The promised land was returning to being nothing more than a burning desert. Just then, the display at the boarding gate in front of him began to flash green. Flight LH-687 to Frankfurt, boarding commencing. A collective sigh of relief, like a taut string finally snapping, rippled through the crowd, mingled with the muffled sobs of those suppressing the guilt of abandoning their country. Amit gripped the cold handle of his suitcase tightly and, without looking back at the sirens wailing behind him, began walking down the dark corridor toward the gate. The sound of footsteps crossing the cold metal jet bridge overlapped in a hollow resonance. Usually, this passage would be filled with the vibrancy of travelers, the rustle of duty-free bags, and the laughter of families. Now, it was governed only by a heavy silence, like a funeral procession. Inside the aircraft, the quality of the air shifted slightly. The chill from the air conditioning carried a faint scent of disinfectant and the synthetic resin characteristic of airplanes. The Lufthansa flight attendants wore professional smiles plastered onto their faces, but a tension they couldn't quite hide flickered in the depths of their eyes. Everyone knew, until this vessel exited Israeli airspace, the risk of becoming a missile target was not zero. Amit sat down in seat 4A, a window seat in business class. He stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin and fastened his seatbelt. Feeling a gaze, he looked to his side and saw the man from the terminal, the former reservist. Perhaps it was a twist of fate, or perhaps simply because most on this flight shared the same circumstances. The man met Amit's eyes for a fleeting second, gave a slight nod without a word, and sank deep into his seat. Opening the window blind, Amit saw the night view of Tel Aviv. The coastal city once dubbed, the city that never sleeps, Ir Lo Hafsaka, was now eerily missing patches of light due to blackouts and power failures. Behind the silhouettes of luxury hotels lining the shore, dull orange lights flickered once more. A few seconds later, a faint vibration transmitted even through the thick acrylic window. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be taking off shortly. By order of air traffic control, we will perform a steep angle climb immediately after takeoff to exit the airspace as quickly as possible. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened tightly. As the captain's German-accented English announcement played, the cabin lights were suddenly extinguished. In the darkness, only the pale blue glow from smartphones dotted the cabin like gravestones. Everyone was likely exchanging messages with family or colleagues left behind. Or perhaps they were staring at news feeds of their homeland with bloodshot eyes, knowing they might never return. The jet engines began to roar, the rotation pressing against the eardrums. The aircraft moved heavily. The speed through the taxiway was noticeably faster than usual, conveying how desperately the pilots wanted to leave this danger zone. Without pausing at the edge of the runway, the aircraft accelerated at full throttle. Intense G-force pressed Amit's body into his seat. "Farewell, Zion," the man next to him whispered, barely audible. The nose lifted, and the wheels left the ground. At that moment, what crossed Amit's mind was neither relief nor sorrow, but a strange sense of liberation. Below, Israeli military bases, settlements, kibbutzim, and the dark neighborhoods densely packed with the ultra-Orthodox receded like a miniature diorama. Beneath that ground, thousands of years of history, blood, and resentment were entwined like a quagmire even at this very second. To whom did the land belong? Whose God was right? Who held the legitimate right? For the sake of that endless proof, how many young lives had been ground away? The aircraft banked sharply toward the Mediterranean, gaining altitude rapidly. Beyond the pitch-black sea lay the European continent. Amit closed his eyes. In his mind, he was already constructing the layout of a co-working space in Berlin and the agenda for an online meeting with the dev team that had fled to Cyprus. Not possessing land was once considered the weakness of the Jewish people and the reason for their persecution. That was why they built their own state with guns and concrete. But that state had now transformed into the heaviest shackle binding them. Then they could simply discard it again. Their new temple resided on cloud servers. Their Torah was written in encrypted source code. Even without an army tied to a border, they could rebuild a state stronger than ever before within the global networks of capital and technology. When the aircraft broke through the clouds and leveled off, the seatbelt sign turned off. In the silent cabin, Amit looked out the window once more. Outside lay the Mediterranean, black as spilled ink. Among the waves surging thousands of feet below, there was no longer any sign of war, no sound of sirens tearing through the air. Only the cold, inorganic stardust twinkled quietly on the other side of the thick acrylic glass. "Would you like something to drink?" The flight attendant's monotone voice pulled Amit back from his contemplation. A drink cart slid quietly into the aisle. "Mineral water. No ice." As Amit answered briefly, the man beside him leaned forward. "Do you have whiskey?" "Single malt. Make it a double." The attendant checked the label on a small bottle and poured the amber liquid into a plastic cup. The man took it and knocked it back in one gulp without water or a chaser, as if swallowing medicine. At the sensation of the potent alcohol searing his esophagus, the man grimaced slightly and let out a deep breath. "Gideon." The man introduced himself abruptly, still staring at his empty cup. "Amit." "I can tell by looking. Startup or cybersecurity?" Gideon said, glancing at the matte black laptop on Amit's lap and the various hardware tokens scattered beside it. "My brother is of the same ilk. He packed up his Herzliya office and flew to London last week." "Where are you headed?" "Half the team is in Cyprus. I'm moving the base to Berlin with a few others. Servers and customer data are already safe in a Swiss data center."
Berlin, who?
Gideon let out a self-deprecating snort. "Returning to the city our grandparents discarded to escape the gas chambers, just so their grandchildren can escape missiles and fanatics. The irony is too perfect even for a black joke. Our history is always coded in the worst kind of sarcasm." "Where is your destination?" "Frankfurt isn't your final stop," Amit asked quietly. "Toronto. My wife has relatives there. I'm not a tech person, so I'll figure out what madness to pursue once I'm there. Just..." Gideon stared into the darkness outside the window again, fiddling with his empty cup. "3 of the young men who were under my command are still lying in a field hospital at the foot of Mount Hermon. One lost both legs. And here I am, the only one in one piece, sprawled in a Lufthansa business class seat, safe above the clouds." The dense guilt and self-loathing behind those words made the dry air of the cabin feel even heavier. Survivor's guilt. An invisible cross that those who decided to abandon their country must carry forever. "You didn't abandon them," Amit said, not as a comfort, but as a cold statement of fact. "The country, the system, collapsed. Even if we stayed and kept paying taxes, and you stayed on the front lines firing a gun, as long as the number of people who do nothing but pray in yeshivas while consuming subsidies keeps growing, mathematical ruin is inevitable. We just moved the most valuable things, the brains, the data, and the lives, onto a lifeboat from a sinking ship. I know that in my head. It's a rational calculation." Gideon closed his eyes and pressed the back of his head hard against the headrest. "But it seems my soul needs a bit more whiskey to accept it. We didn't lose our country. We got fed up with it and gave up on it ourselves. The land we finally obtained after 2,000 years of prayer, we threw into the trash with our own hands in just 80 years. This weight won't disappear, no matter how much you rationalize it." The cabin returned to being a space dominated only by the low hum of the engines. Amit opened his laptop again. On the screen, the architecture diagram of the new network he had just finished migrating glowed pale blue. A blueprint for a new state on the cloud, possessing no physical borders. There were no bomb shelters, no conscription offices, no fundamentalist politicians. There was only pure logic and stateless capital. It would be some time before they understood the true price of this exodus. Suddenly, the aircraft dropped sharply as if hit from below by a giant invisible hand. With a cold electronic ding, the seatbelt sign overhead lit up in red. Turbulence. They must have entered a pressure trough typical over the Mediterranean. The entire cabin was enveloped in fine vibrations, and the dry sound of plastic joints creaking began to echo from various corners in the dark. "Shaking again," Gideon muttered without moving, eyes still closed. There was not a hint of fear in his voice. Compared to the earth-shaking blasts of missile impacts or the organ-crushing shock of a tank cannon firing, clear air turbulence at 10,000 meters was likely nothing more than a cradle's rock to him. At least it's shaking without missile fragments flying in, Amit replied with a short snort, tightening his seatbelt buckle with one hand. His eyes remained fixed on the pale blue screen of his laptop. On the screen, the architecture of the new system he had built unfolded as a network of geometric nodes. The server clusters were housed in a data center converted from a former military underground bunker in the Swiss Alps, with backups distributed in Iceland and Singapore. As Amit scrolled through the lines of code, he felt a mixture of strange exhilaration and a chilly sense of emptiness. We are fixing a bug in history, he told himself. The Zionists of the 19th century had installed a physical hardware called a state in the land of Palestine to end 2,000 years of persecution and wandering. However, they had made a fatal calculation error. The land already had other inhabitants, it was surrounded by hostile states, and above all, they carried a virus, the ultra-Orthodox, within themselves that denied the very existence of the state. As a result, the maintenance costs of the Israel hardware, military spending and human lives, had ballooned astronomically, and finally the entire system was about to crash. If so, there was only one solution. Discard the hardware and migrate everything to the cloud, virtual space. Jews were originally a decentralized network community connected not by land, but by sharing a text, the Torah. No matter where they scattered across the world, they maintained their identity by reciting the same prayers and sharing the same concepts. The exodus they were facing now was not defeat or flight, but nothing other than an OS update from an old, inefficient physical server to a cutting-edge decentralized cloud. Suddenly, a green notification popped up in the corner of the screen via the in-flight Wi-Fi. It was from Daniel, the lead engineer who had gone ahead to Larnaca, Cyprus. Production deployment to AWS complete. Latency within specs. New system fully operational. A cold, thin smile played on Amit's lips. The office in the fortified city built in the middle of the Palestinian wilderness would likely have its power cut tomorrow and eventually be buried in dust and missile fragments. But the code and algorithms they had spent years writing with blood and sweat were at this very moment being released into the borderless sea of cyberspace, beginning to function perfectly. What's so funny? Gideon, who had been clutching his empty whiskey cup, raised an eyebrow at Amit's faint smile. Nothing. Amit tapped the screen lightly with his fingertip. I just thought that our new state was just founded right now. There are no bomb shelters, no draft boards, no wailing wall. There is only pure logic. Neither terrorist rockets nor Haredi protesters will ever reach here. Gideon glanced at Amit's screen, but showed no interest in the rows of code, slowly shaking his head. People can't live on logic alone. In that virtual state of yours, there's no delicious hummus, no lukewarm Mediterranean breeze, no absolute silence that envelopes the streets on Shabbat. What we discarded isn't just dirt. It's scent, and it's memory. Gideon's words pierced Amit's consciousness like a sharp thorn, just as he was trying to immerse himself in the world of cold code. Memory sometimes kills people, Amit countered quietly. How much blood have we shed because we obsessed over the memory of a temple from 2,000 years ago? Memories should be compressed and stored in the depths of a database archive. What we need is a platform for survival. The shaking of the aircraft began to subside. It was a sign they had passed the pressure trough and were approaching the European continent. Survival, huh? Gideon sighed. My grandfather survived Auschwitz. My father survived the Yom Kippur War. I survived Gaza and Lebanon. And you are now trying to survive by fleeing into the world of the cloud. Gideon shoved his empty cup into the seat pocket and looked down at the faint lights of the Greek islands scattered far below in the dark. We are geniuses at surviving. There's no doubt about that. But, Amit, Gideon continued in a tired, low voice. After surviving, our history never once taught us how to live in peace. We've always been desperate to find the next escape route, build the next barrier, and rewrite the system to protect ourselves from the next persecutor. Is that cloud state of yours really anything more than a new, invisible bomb shelter? Just made of encryption keys and firewalls instead of concrete and steel? Amit started to argue, but then swallowed his words. The hierarchical structure of robust security protocols displayed on his laptop screen, It did, indeed, look eerily similar to the interception logic of the Iron Dome missile defense system. Detect intruder, isolate, neutralize. Only the form had changed. Even in the new territory of cyberspace, they were simply constructing an endless defensive war against an invisible enemy. Perhaps, Amit admitted softly after a long silence, but at least my bomb shelter doesn't shed blood. It doesn't take anyone's land, and its resources aren't consumed by people who do nothing but pray and refuse to work. For now, Gideon closed his eyes and tilted his head as if falling back into a deep sleep. But as long as humans are involved, any perfect system will eventually develop bugs. That country we abandoned was supposed to be the most beautiful, moral, and perfect socialist utopia, kibbutz, in the world when it was founded. At the very least, make sure you don't give administrative privileges to anyone in your new country. After that, Gideon fell silent. Soon, the sound of deep, regular breathing could be heard. Extreme tension and exhaustion, combined with the alcohol from the whiskey, had finally managed to temporarily numb his resilient nerves. Amit dimmed his screen to the minimum and looked away from the sea of code. According to the flight map on the monitor, the aircraft had already passed over the rugged mountains of the Balkans and was about to reach the plains of Central Europe. The edge of the eastern horizon was beginning to turn a pale violet, like ink bleeding into water. Dawn. Eventually, the orderly bands of light from orange sodium lamps on highways began to appear below. It was the visualization of Europe's overwhelming, cold tranquility, a stark contrast to the distorted night view of Tel Aviv, which had been submerged in darkness and pockmarked by missile impacts. We will soon begin our descent into Frankfurt am Main International Airport. Local weather is cloudy, temperature 8 degrees Celsius. At the captain's announcement, the quiet cabin began to stir. Everyone checked their seatbelts, opened window blinds, or gripped their smartphones. In every movement, there was a dense permeation of relief, mingled with the dread of the new reality of being rootless. Amit closed his laptop and locked it with his fingerprint. Within this thin slab of metal were all his company's assets, the trust of his customers, and the livelihoods of all his employees, all encrypted and packed away. We are becoming wanderers, diaspora, once again. To the land of Germany, from which his grandparents had fled for their lives. To that earth where persecution and barbed wire once awaited, they were now returning as premium guests in Lufthansa business class, carrying high-level IT skills and immense capital. A dizzying irony, as if the great roulette wheel of history had spun once and the ball had landed in a pocket of the same color. As the aircraft pierced through the thick gray clouds, the orderly zoned green farmland and the modern skyscrapers of Frankfurt emerged through the cold morning mist. The heavy mechanical sound of the landing gear deploying echoed from the belly of the plane. Amit glanced at Gideon, who was still sleeping. At his feet were 3 massive suitcases. Inside them were the wreckage of a lost daily life and the memories of the battlefield that could never be erased. In contrast, Amit's only luggage was a single thin briefcase. This lightness, possessing no memories and no land, was the strongest weapon in the new era, and the only strategy for survival. Farewell, Israel. In his heart, he rehearsed the name one last time. The land that God once gave, that man took, that was defended with blood, and that was now abandoned of his own will. With a heavy thud, the tires struck the German runway. The roar of the thrust reversers filled the cabin. An intense deceleration pressed Amit into his seat. No one in the cabin clapped in relief. Only a deep, heavy silence coldly enveloped the arrival of their new exodus. The moment the aircraft came to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign turned off, the tension in the cabin air suddenly slackened. However, it was not filled with joy. Only heavy sighs and the inorganic clicking of seatbelts being unfastened echoed, as if after a funeral. Gideon, who had been sleeping, slowly opened his eyes. With bloodshot eyes, he vaguely checked his surroundings and looked up at the leaden sky of Frankfurt outside the window. We're here. Yeah. Across the Mediterranean, across the Balkans, Amit replied, placing his briefcase on his lap as he prepared to stand. Welcome to the former hell, and the current safe zone. Gideon shook his head slightly, pulling his passport and boarding pass from the seat pocket. Safe, huh? Gideon laughed self-deprecatingly. We fled missiles and fanatics only to return to the country where half our clan was turned to ash. You might survive in that lightweight cloud state of yours, but a mud-caked man like me eventually has to lean on something, carry something, wherever I go. The two joined the line of people filing into the aisle in silence. Everyone kept their mouths shut, staring at their feet as they were swallowed into the cold jet bridge. They were the refugees, the most elite exports of the State of Israel. They walked through the massive terminal of Frankfurt Airport. Modern glass architecture, orderly signs, and above all, an absolute silence devoid of sirens. Amit opened his smartphone and connected to the local network. Instantly, messages from the team in Berlin and green signals indicating the operational status of the Swiss data center filled the screen. His state was functioning perfectly even at this moment. Before passport control, the line split in two: EU citizens and all other passports. Amit pulled his brand-new red German passport, reacquired through his grandmother's lineage, from his breast pocket. You're in the EU line. I'm over there, Gideon said, holding up his blue Israeli passport. His destination was Toronto, but he had to pass through transit security first. Yeah, good luck in Toronto. You too, Amit. I hope your bloodless bomb shelter never gets hacked. With a brief, dry handshake, the two walked toward their respective lines. Amit stood in the EU citizens line and proceeded to the automated gate. He let the machine read the IC chip in his passport and stared into the facial recognition camera. A few seconds. No effort, no questioning, no cold stares. A green lamp lit up, and the transparent acrylic gate opened quietly. The very border his grandparents had risked their lives to flee, swearing never to set foot in again. He had crossed effortlessly with a single facial recognition scan, as nothing more than a businessman. As he passed through the gate and descended the long escalator toward baggage claim, Amit looked up. There, a massive digital sign for the airport displayed a sophisticated advertisement for a major local investment bank, boasting its status in the international financial center of Frankfurt. The video showed diverse people in suits, tablets and smart glasses in hand, smiling and shaking hands. Overlaid on the video, a simple yet powerful catchphrase was displayed prominently in German and English. Asterisk, work sets you free.
Arbeit macht frei.
Asterisk. Asterisk. True liberation in the digital economy. With us. Asterisk. On the escalator, Amit suddenly felt the blood drain from the soles of his feet. The advertising agency had likely completely forgotten the historical context, recycling that infamous phrase for a modern setting solely for its positive connotation of economic success through hard work. Amit gripped his brand-new German passport and the briefcase containing billions of dollars worth of value in his laptop. That was it. They had fled missiles, fled religion, and fled the curse of the land to escape into this overwhelmingly rational, perfectly functioning capitalist system, the new bomb shelter. Here, lineage and religion didn't matter. Only the work that contributed to the system and created value gave them proof of existence and freedom.
Odrsi, hysterical lef escaped omitesh srot.
Asterisk, he was right. Our history is always coded in the worst kind of irony. Asterisk. The escalator carried him quietly and surely toward the entrance of the shining new camp.